The fall of consciousness, reclaiming your mind from collective stupidity. Imagine living in a world where people no longer engage in the radical act of thinking for themselves. A world where the anxious digital crowd dictates what is right, what is real, and even what is morally acceptable. They establish these truths not because they are inherently valid, but because they are overwhelmingly popular. Now, pause and look around. Does that sound like a distant, hyperbolic dystopia? Or does it sound frighteningly, intimately familiar? We are currently living in an age where information is infinite, yet true wisdom is vanishing. Where people speak endlessly into the void, but manage to say almost nothing of substance. Where everyone aggressively defends an opinion, but frighteningly few possess the courage to nurture a single original thought. This is not progress. This is not evolution. This is the fall of consciousness, and it is occurring right before our eyes, a silent catastrophe of the mind. In this deep exploration, we are going to uncover why this pervasive collective stupidity has become one of the single greatest threats to human intelligence, individual freedom, and spiritual growth. We will dissect how our consciousness has been relentlessly hijacked by social conformity, fear of exclusion, and the powerful comforting illusion of belonging. But most importantly, we will reveal the ancient, powerful steps required to break free from this mental bondage, and why taking that step is the essential prerequisite for awakening true, sovereign intelligence. The final revelation, the most critical and empowering one, will show you the exact process of reclaiming your mind from the collective hypnosis that currently rules modern society. The death of critical awareness. Think about this honestly. When was the last time you experienced an original thought? A thought that arose purely from your own observation, one that wasn't already influenced by the constant stream of noise you saw, heard, or compulsively read online. Most people today dangerously confuse raw information with deep understanding, confuse incessant noise with genuine knowledge, and dangerously confuse mass agreement with absolute truth. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once stated that to truly think for yourself, you must be willing to question everything. Yet, in our contemporary society, the simple act of questioning the consensus has been recast as an act of intolerable rebellion. The fall of consciousness begins the moment the individual mind stops questioning the collective. When people willingly surrender their inner sovereign authority in exchange for the fleeting comfort of being accepted, they are unknowingly trading their profound freedom for a cheap, temporary illusion. This is the precise genesis of collective stupidity, not an inherent lack of intelligence, but the deliberate psychological death of critical awareness. Psychologists have long studied this terrifying phenomenon. Gustave Le Bon, often called the father of crowd psychology, meticulously explained that when individuals merge into a crowd, especially a digital one, they lose their independent capacity for rational thought and moral judgment. The crowd instantly becomes a single irrational organism ruled not by reason, but by volatile emotion, hypnotic suggestion, and rapid imitation. In the suffocating air of the crowd, the intelligent man becomes little more than an echo, repeating, never truly thinking. You can witness this mechanism everywhere today. People no longer ask what is factually true. They only ask, what does everyone else currently believe? The desperate biological need to belong, to avoid uncomfortable conflict, to be validated by the digital tribe, instantly overrides logic and reason. In social media, in the polarizing theater of politics, in cultural trends, even in spiritual movements, people follow trends with the blind obedience of religious zealots, as if popularity were a substitute for truth. But truth does not depend on a favorable vote count. As the existentialist Søren Kierkegaard asserted with chilling clarity, The crowd is untruth. Why is this internal surrender happening? Because consciousness itself has fallen asleep. Modern man is perpetually distracted, constantly consuming media, constantly reacting to notifications, but rarely engaging in genuine, quiet observation. Our minds are relentlessly flooded with images, opinions, and instant judgments every single second. We live in a self-inflicted mental storm that leaves no viable room for essential silence. And in that silence lies the only space where true original thought can arise. Ask yourself the most uncomfortable question. How much of what you confidently call your thought today is genuinely yours? How many of your most fundamental beliefs, your deepest fears, and your core values were chosen consciously, through hard-won insight? And how many were merely inherited, passively absorbed, or aggressively imposed by the relentless world around you? If you dare to look honestly, you might realize that much of what you call your mind isn't truly your own property. Carl Jung warned that when the individual fails to become conscious of the inner mechanisms operating within, he becomes possessed by the collective unconscious, driven by powerful unseen archetypes, blind instincts, and overwhelming social forces he can neither understand nor control. In stark terms, when you stop thinking for yourself, something else thinks for you. And that something else almost always serves interests that are not in any way your own sovereign interests. But here resides the profound paradox. The collective cannot sustain itself without the willing participation of individuals. Every single time one person chooses hard-won awareness over comfortable conformity, chooses challenging truth over transient comfort, and chooses authentic understanding over passive imitation, the entire collective field begins to subtly shift. Real evolution starts not in the systems of the world, but in the private sanctuary of the soul. The architecture of compliance. The systems that surround and govern us were never designed to awaken independent thought. They were expertly designed to manage and control it. Society, as it stands, is a psychological structure that ruthlessly rewards obedience and punishes the unsettling disruption of independent thinking. From the moment we enter formal education, we are taught not to question the established authority, but merely to comply. The modern school system conditions us to memorize raw data rather than to deeply understand principles, to instantly repeat rather than to patiently reason. It praises those who follow instructions with absolute fidelity and quietly suppresses those who dare to challenge the curriculum or the methodology. We are not truly educated to think. We are functionally programmed to conform. This is not a vast, shadowy conspiracy. It is a psychological mechanism as old as the very notion of civilization itself. The renowned philosopher Bertrand Russell once quipped that most people would rather die than think. In fact, they do. The mind that questions instantly becomes dangerous to any collective that thrives on rigid control. And so, from the earliest age, the insidious seeds of conformity are planted deep within our core. Consider how society aggressively defines success. You are constantly told what to desire, what to value, what you absolutely must chase. Money, status, perpetual external validation. All these external goals depend entirely on the approval of others. The more aggressively you seek that external approval, the more deeply you become enslaved by the very system that grants it. The modern prison has no visible walls. It is meticulously constructed from social expectations, the threat of public judgment, and the crippling fear of rejection. This is the true essence of collective stupidity, when the individual mind becomes existentially afraid to stand alone. The media landscape further amplifies this collective hypnosis. Every hour we are bombarded by urgent messages, breathless headlines, and the transient trends that explicitly tell us what to believe and who to hate. The news media rarely just informs, it expertly programs emotions. Fear, outrage, and constant tribal division are the psychological tools used to keep people reactive, polarized, and perpetually distracted. When everyone is emotionally charged and divided, no one is thinking clearly or critically. A mind paralyzed by fear is an easy mind to control. Psychologists describe this phenomenon as groupthink, the self-destructive tendency for individuals to aggressively suppress internal dissent and conform to the majority's opinions, even when they know those opinions are demonstrably wrong. In 1951, Solomon Asch conducted his famous line judgment experiment, demonstrating that individuals would literally deny the evidence of their own eyes simply to align with the majority consensus. Imagine that. People would rather be factually wrong with everyone else than be factually right alone. Now, amplify that psychological mechanism by billions of connected, anxious people. That is the terrifying reality of the world we currently inhabit. Social media has morphed into the modern, accelerated version of the Asch experiment, a digital arena of constant, high-stakes mass imitation. Every click, every post, every viral trend reinforces the dangerous illusion that the majority is always correct. But truth is not democratic. Truth does not depend on how many people anxiously click like or share a post. Yet the collective has successfully learned to replace complex thinking with simplistic algorithms, to replace deep personal morality with fleeting popularity, and to replace challenging reality with comfortable consensus. This is a profound regression, a civilization that willingly loses the ability to think independently eventually loses its very soul. And the most tragic element is that people will often viciously defend their own mental chains. They openly mock those who begin to see through the illusion, labeling them as crazy, conspiratorial, or out of touch. But this knee-jerk, aggressive reaction is not intelligence. It is pure fear. The collective fears what it fundamentally does not understand, and it instinctively destroys what directly threatens its illusion of safety and unity. Plato's allegory of the cave is not an ancient history lesson. It perfectly describes this contemporary condition. The prisoners, chained inside the cave, mistake dancing shadows on the wall for absolute reality. When one prisoner escapes and sees the blinding world beyond, he returns to try and liberate the others, but they resist him violently. They would rather cling to their familiar comforting shadows than face the terrifying disruptive light of truth. The cave is our culture. The shadows are the comfortable beliefs we refuse to question. Ask yourself now, are you seeing the shadows or are you seeing the truth? Do you live by your own hard-won understanding or by the convenient mental projections of others? Every single time you repeat a slogan you don't truly comprehend, every time you agree out of paralyzing fear, every time you silence your own intuition to avoid judgment, you descend deeper into the cave. But awareness, the essential first act of rebellion, begins the moment you realize that the cave exists. The revolutionary act of questioning, even questioning silently to yourself, is the first act of defiance against the collective hypnosis, the spiritual crisis of self-forgetfulness. The fall of consciousness is not just about informational ignorance. It is fundamentally the separation from the inner source of truth. When humanity collectively stopped thinking, it stopped listening, not just to external reason, but to the quiet, subtle voice of the soul. The true tragedy of collective stupidity is not that people are uninformed, it's that they are desperately disconnected from their own inner knowing. The ancient philosophers and mystics universally spoke of an inner light, a higher consciousness that perceives truth beyond mere surface appearances. Plato called it nous, the divine intellect. In Eastern philosophy, it is known as Buddhi, the awakened mind. In many traditions, it is simply the light of the spirit. Different names, but the same single essence, the conscious awareness that perceives reality exactly as it is, not as a panicked society paints it. But this inner light demands silence. It demands solitude, deep reflection, and profound courage, all of which are being systematically eliminated from modern life. We have substituted silence with endless anxious noise, solitude with constant frantic distraction, and reflection with immediate emotional reaction. The human being has become so addicted to external stimulation that the necessary absence of it now registers as a form of suffering. When consciousness falls, it instantly forgets itself. It begins to frantically seek outside what can only ever be found within. People look for validation, true meaning, and identity in the collective, failing to realize that the collective itself is in a deep, chaotic sleep. The blind leading the blind. That is the terrifying hallmark of an unconscious civilization. Carl Jung famously said, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you do not know, the world will tell you." That is precisely what has occurred. We have allowed the world to define our identity, our values, our desires, and our beliefs. And in doing so, we have completely abandoned our own inner compass, our profound self-sovereignty. This is why collective stupidity is far more than a social issue. It is a fundamental spiritual crisis. It represents the total inversion of true intelligence, where passive imitation instantly replaces hard-won insight and external noise violently replaces inner knowing. People don't stop thinking because they're inherently lazy. They stop thinking because they are fundamentally afraid of what they might discover if they actually do. Thinking for yourself means facing intensely uncomfortable truths. It means realizing that much of what you were taught to believe about success, morality, and even happiness are in fact necessary illusions designed only to keep you compliant and consuming. It means seeing that the structures you trusted, media, politics, popular culture, do not have your awakening in mind. That realization is a painful, disruptive process. This is why most people aggressively choose temporary comfort over permanent consciousness. The inversion has a profound, dangerous consequence. When you lose contact with your own inner world, you become devastatingly vulnerable to external manipulation. Anyone who controls your attention controls your mind. Anyone who shapes your shallow desires shapes your ultimate destiny. This is why the modern world constantly fights a war for your attention, not because it values your awareness, but because it fears it. The true revolution, therefore, is not an external war fought in the streets. It is an internal war fought in the quiet theater of the mind. To awaken from collective stupidity is to remember your own inherent, unique capacity to see, to know, and to deeply discern. Consciousness is not something you gain. It is something you must fiercely uncover. It has always been there, buried beneath relentless layers of social conditioning, paralyzing fear, and endless imitation. Every historical spiritual awakening began with one person daring to see the world differently. The Buddha saw through the illusions of suffering. Socrates saw through the willing ignorance of Athens. These individuals did not simply think differently. They were different because they operated from a place of consciousness, not from the passive, reactive pressure of the crowd. The final revelation: 3 steps to reclaiming freedom. The fall of consciousness can only be definitively reversed when one single person decides to wake up. Not the crowd, not society, not the system, but you. You may currently believe that you are powerless against the massive, monolithic collective, but that belief itself is the final, most tenacious illusion. The truth is the profound opposite. The collective is ultimately powerless against one fully conscious mind. A single awakened individual instantly becomes a light so radiant that no amount of surrounding darkness can ever extinguish it. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly. The higher consciousness rises, the more fundamentally misunderstood it becomes by those still chained to the low ground." But that misunderstanding is the necessary price of awakening, the courage to stand alone in your truth. The first step to breaking free from collective stupidity is the foundational act of awareness. You cannot change what you do not see. Begin by observing your own thoughts, your automatic emotional reactions, your immediate impulses. Ask yourself the critical question: where did this thought truly come from? Is it truly mine, or did I inherit it wholesale from the crowd? Most people never stop to ask this, and that is why they remain profoundly asleep. Awareness dissolves conditioning like sunlight dissolves fog. The moment you see the pattern, it begins to lose its grip entirely. The collective hypnosis only survives in unconsciousness. The second step is the essential practice of solitude. You cannot think clearly in constant, distracting noise. Every great thinker, from Marcus Aurelius to Henry David Thoreau, emphasized the absolute necessity of solitude. When you are truly alone, you are no longer performing for the crowd. You begin to feel the unique pulse of your own mind, the quiet voice of intuition that has always been there but was drowned out. Solitude is not debilitating isolation. It is a radical, powerful reconnection. In the silence, you will sense a deeper intelligence, not the critical intellect that analyzes, but the pure awareness that simply sees. This awareness doesn't need validation. It simply knows. The third step is courage, the courage to question everything, to doubt the loudest voices, to say no when everyone else instinctively screams yes. The courage to trust your own inner intuition when it completely contradicts the prevailing tide. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the refusal to let fear rule your fundamental choices. Collective stupidity thrives on fear. Fear of exclusion, fear of judgment, fear of being demonstrably wrong. When you no longer fear those things, you become unshakably free. But the final realization, the one that holds the greatest, most transformative power, is love. Not the sentimental kind, but the conscious, radical love that sees the collective sickness clearly and still chooses to understand, not hate. Because hatred of the collective is merely another subtle form of bondage. True intelligence does not rebel with blind anger. It transforms through profound understanding. When you awaken, you do not separate yourself from humanity. You illuminate it. The awakened person does not fight darkness. They simply shine so brightly that the darkness naturally dissolves around them. That is the highest act of rebellion, to become conscious in a profoundly unconscious world. You see, the fall of consciousness was never an inevitable fate. It was a choice, a collective, comfortable choice to value external comfort over hard-won truth. And the rise of consciousness will also be a choice. Your choice right now, in this very moment. You are not a passive observer. You are an active co-creator of reality. Every thought you purify, every illusion you dissolve, contributes to the awakening of all humanity. The mystic Krishnamurti once said, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." To rise above collective stupidity is not arrogance, it is sanity. It is remembering that the profound purpose of the mind is not to blindly obey, but to clearly see. Ask yourself the final question: what kind of world do you want to create? One built on thoughtless imitation and chronic fear, or one built on fierce awareness and sovereign truth? The answer begins and ends with you. Because the fall of consciousness is not final. It ends the very moment you decide to remember who you are, a conscious being capable of infinite independent understanding. When you reclaim your own mind, you become the antidote to the collective sickness. You become living proof that truth still exists, independent of consensus. And that is exactly how real revolutions begin. Not with crowds, but with the ascent of a single conscious mind. Keep questioning, keep seeking solitude, keep choosing courage. You were not born to think like everyone else. You were born to see beyond the illusion and to finally think for yourself.